Appreciate you folks coming. Stephen Spoonamore, who's one of the leading experts in the world on data security and who has agreed to be an expert witness assisting the plaintiffs in the King Lincoln case and others in addressing some of the election integrity issues. Had a conflict in Washington, and so he's participating by the cell phone on the speaker. Stephen, I didn't get a bio, but I basically understand.
I'm sorry, I'll resend that.
Okay, but basically, Stephen is works on the business side for credit card companies and that sort of thing, and chasing data thieves, identity thieves, etc., around the globe, and but also consults with government agencies, including the Secret Service, the Pentagon, and Federal Bureau of Investigation in criminal matters that they're involved with. So he's really one of the top, in effect, a top private cop in the world on this subject of data security. And so basically the purpose of the news conference today is to fill the investigative press corps in on the developments in the King Lincoln case. And what we have filed this morning is a motion for leave to requesting the court to lift the stay that was entered into on joint motion of the parties, Secretary of State Bruner and the plaintiffs, to explore settlement discussions in the case. And at one point this was interrupted when the Secretary wanted to bring all the ballots that had been ordered preserved by Judge Marbley, bring them into one location in Columbus. And so the stay was lifted for that purpose. The ballots came in, and as you probably know, there were significant omissions and reports of destruction of some of the ballots. After we were advised by part of the discussion, the settlement discussion we had with the Attorney General included the concept of the Attorney General's office taking advantage of the new provision of House Bill 3 that allows the Attorney General to investigate election fraud. And we were advised, after a number of ongoing communication with that office, we were advised that they were set up and ready to have begin to explore that. And we submitted materials. We submitted Bob's book on what happened in Ohio, a documentation of the exit poll discrepancy, and much information that had worked its way into the news media, our lawsuit, and John Conyers' report to the Congress that was the factual basis for the challenge to the electoral vote of the Ohio electoral vote in January 2005. Within the last month or so, I was advised by that office that their question was, well, who do you want us to indict? And they have limited staff. So their concept of looking at this from a criminal standpoint was not to convene a grand jury and to cast the net broadly, bring people in to explain what's going on, and use the grand jury process to investigate and narrow the focus into the question of who may have tampered with votes. But rather, they wanted us to come to them with a more focused case. And we advised them that we were going to, in that case, we were going to ask for a lifting of the stay and to proceed with a civil case in order to conduct discovery to be able to do that.
You should also note that very early on, we went to Washington and met with the House Judiciary Committee staff who agreed to come into Ohio in early March of 2007. And we had an agreement from then Attorney General Mark Dan's office. But for whatever reason, perhaps other pursuits, the Attorney General's office never got back to us. So there was an agreement that John Conyers was reluctant to come in, and the Attorney General's office agreed because they knew Ohio, but it simply never happened. And particularly with the destruction of the ballots, that would have been important.
Yeah. So anyway, the other thing I'll mention is that I met with John Conyers within the last 2 weeks and made him aware of what we think we have in terms of new resources and new information, including the availability of someone with the expertise of Steve Spoonamore to assist the state, assist the Congress, and assist the court in understanding what we have to understand for purposes of better assuring the integrity of the 2008 election. The materials we passed out this morning are the motion that we filed this morning to lift the stay, explaining that we don't want to be disruptive, we want to be targeted, focused, and helpful. And we have communicated with the Attorney General's office and indicated to them that we are perfectly anxious indeed to make Mr. Spoonamore and other information available to them to help them do their job and see how they want to proceed in the context of this litigation and otherwise. And we've also given you 2 letters, they're called document hold notices. If you recall, we earlier did this with the Ohio Chamber of Commerce. We sent a document hold notice to Matt Karras, who has represented the U.S. Chamber, and asked them to hold documents relating to their activities to use corporate money to influence Supreme Court elections. And we've asked, as part of a prospective claim under the Ohio Corrupt Practices Act, and also a letter to U.S. Attorney General Michael Mukasey, asking that he advise the federal government to hold emails from Karl Rove, that we think is an individual who has been at the center of both the use of corporate money to attack state attorneys general in their elections and candidates for Supreme Court in their elections in the states, and also in the manipulation of the election process. And so we're asking that documents be held. We've expressed concern about the reports that Mr. Rove destroyed his emails and suggested that we want the duplicates that should exist under the control of the Secret Service to be sure that those are retained, as well as on the receiving end in the Justice Department and elsewhere, that those documents are retained for purposes of this prospective litigation, which we anticipate Mr. Rove would be identified as having engaged in an ongoing pattern of corrupt activity, specifically affecting the situation here in Ohio.
And also, you should point out that the Ohio election results were outsourced to the old Pioneer Bank building in Chattanooga, Tennessee in 2004, which was on the same server as those White House emails, and run by a man named Mike Connell of GovTech. So we like to discuss exactly how the Ohio operation was outsourced. And it's also been reported, of course, that he's been tied to the firewall insecurity in the U.S. Congress as well.
Yeah. What Bob is pointing out that we, as counsel for the plaintiffs, have recently been introduced to some phenomenal paralegal and research resources in addition to Mr. Spoonamore, and we think we're now in a position to go after the issues of election integrity in a very targeted way, as opposed to casting a fishing net. We're able to do some rifle shots. There's a guy named Michael Connell who is he designs websites, and he manages the information technology. Interestingly, he's done this for the Bush campaign in Florida. I'm sorry, the Bush campaign of 2000 and the Bush campaign of 2004. Simultaneously, he was doing IT work for the state of Florida in 2000 and for the Office of the Secretary of State in 2004. And just think of this. Here's a person who is an instrument of a major presidential campaign, simultaneously serving as setting up the hosting of the votes in the Ohio election, in which that campaign is a competitor. We're not saying that he did anything wrong in the sense of misconduct, but we're saying that these conflicting roles raise some issues. The other important thing about Mr. Connell is that he, by virtue of his involvement in a variety of these roles that we're concerned with, as a witness, he can provide a perspective in one person that can bring a great deal of information together to better inform folks what happened and what some of the vulnerabilities are and where some of the data security breaches may have occurred. Not that he caused, but that as an observer of the system or a manager of the system, that he could identify as, yeah, this is something that could have been breached and could have created a problem. Stephen, do you want to, I've said this to more than one person. I assume you've probably heard it. Mr. Spoonamore, in my opinion, is the best witness that I've ever encountered in my 38 years of law practice. So with that introduction, Stephen, do you have any comments you want to make?
Well, I'm not sure how many people you've met in your 38 years of law practice. But yes, to clarify for those I can't see or are gathered, what I do professionally is I build systems that look for fraud. So if you've ever had your phone ring and it's MasterCard Corporation, one of your banks, asking you if you're making a charge somewhere, those are my computers doing their job. And we create a variety of systems for clients, mostly the global credit card and banking organizations, but yes, I also assist some law enforcement agencies. Currently I'm serving on a task force put together by BENS, which is the Business Executives for National Security, to create a global anti-money laundering system to assist the Pentagon and law enforcement with terror finance. So I have a reasonable expertise in understanding when a pattern of mathematical behavior is outside of the acceptable mean of a process where you should launch a fraud investigation. And I am a long time, very clear, a very clear voice in stating you cannot secure electronic voting. On an average day, we deal with 9 billion settlements a day in the global credit card system, and we understand that we have approximately 16 to 23 basis points of error and fraud. And those are systems run by the top people in the world who work at it 24/7. You set up a bunch of grandmothers to put together a bunch of computers once every 2 years with out-of-date equipment. Basically, those machines are architected in such a manner to maximize their capacity to do virtually invisible fraud. Immediately before the 2004 election, I actually was chairing the National Electronic Coordinating Commission's task force for identity management for government and had a direct exchange with Mr. Blackwell at the National Summit where I did a presentation, he did a presentation, and he refused to even discuss the matter, saying this was not the right time or place. I said, well, this is not the right time or place. And then you have the chair of the task force assigned to determine the security of these issues and the person who is dealing with security of these issues. I'm not sure where it is. But in the 2004 election, there are certainly, from my perspective, on any of the programs we run for any of my banks or global credit cards, the results from the 14 counties, which I believe you guys have had shown the data, which are the down ballot issues are radically out of alignment with the presidential vote. Those are the sort of results in a mathematical balance that would instantaneously credit card fraud investigation or a banking settlement investigation, because you have one piece of data which is clearly been made out of line with other pieces of data in the process. And while I appreciate, actually know Mr. Mike Connell and have worked with him on some international issues, he certainly has exposure to a great number of these things, but I am extremely confident in the analysis that the 2004 election anomalies exist because of the way the tabulators were programmed in a limited number of counties. And all of the counties associated with this were programmed by the Rapp family, who run triad systems out of Xenia, Ohio. So, in my opinion, which I have stated since 2004 until this date, there should be an investigation launched as to exactly what happened. And I certainly know in the Green Party recount, there was an enormous number of strange activities in which Triad and the Rapp family were running around the state, taking hard drives out of computers, putting in new hard drives, and posting vote results. And the reason all this was going on, I'm quite confident, is because the hard drives they were pulling out had fraudulent code in them. Simple as that. Certainly, if that happened in one of our banks, people would be arrested and in jail by now. So, that's my analysis. And I'm glad somebody's finally taking enough interest to go ahead and move forward with this.
Be happy to answer any questions, and Mr. Spoonamore is available to answer any questions.
Cliff, how will your discovery moving forward differ then with his help? Will you be targeting different records?
I'm sorry, whoever is speaking is too far away from the mic. I can't hear the question.
My question is, with your assistance now, how will the discovery that's already existed in this case begin to differ? Will it be more targeted, more technical?
Well, what Stephen has said to us is that when you have this clear indicator of fraud, a clear pattern, why get distracted by other things? There may have been 1,000 things that happened, but when you've got this clear pattern, why not focus on that and make sure you resolve it? In our original case in the Ohio Supreme Court, the Moss versus Bush, the core of our case was exactly what Mr. Spoonamore is talking about, because in those 14 counties where what was called the Connolly anomaly, where the down-ticket candidates got more votes than carried, that if you adjust for that anomaly or that situation, it is enough votes to have changed the outcome of the election, which is the burden of the plaintiffs in an election contest. So the focus of our discovery, or the focus of our efforts in cooperation with the Secretary of State, would be to find out who was responsible for that. If it's the Rapp family and the programming of the tabulators, we need to know that so that the Rapp family will be closely monitored, if not put in jail, before the 2008 election. Go ahead, Stephen.
Okay. Yes. I'm a computer systems architect, so the law enforcement elements of it, I'm not clear on how it improves the discovery at this point. I think that there's an enormous concern that most of the parties who, in my opinion, should have, looking at this from a banking fraud investigation, it's very clear where we would have begun, where Secret Service or one of the private banks or a global credit card company, we would have been knocking on the doors in Xenia the next day. But, subsequently with hard drives pulled, a variety of things, 3 years of time passed. I'm not quite clear exactly what happens at this point, but it was certainly my understanding as recently, and this needs to be validated by somebody, they still retain the contract to program any of these tabulators. Well, there it is.
Well,
it really doesn't matter if you have no verifiable results, if you have lines of people, PX machines, even if PX machines are programmed correctly, which you have no idea if they're working correctly. Once all of those machines have voted and you've taken the memory cards out of them, you really have no idea what's on each memory card, and then they're loaded into a tabulator that's supposed to count up the results. You don't know what's in the code of the tabulator.
Well,
And the only way to determine if there's been fraud in a positive sense is to get the hard drive that was used that way and then forensically do an analysis on the code and the use of the code on that hard drive, which is a relatively straightforward thing to do. We do it all the time in bank investigations, which is why when in the Green Party recount, all of a sudden news broke of them driving around the state, pulling and swapping out hard drives. It should have been in handcuffs that day.
well, and this point should be made. Even though we're years from the election, and reports of this conduct, including a very clearly crafted letter by John Conyers pointing out the pattern involving Triad. Triad has never been interrogated under oath in either a civil or a criminal context, to the best of our knowledge. There was an FBI investigation launched at the request of John Conyers, and very shortly a letter coming back from the FBI to Mr. Conyers stating that they had found no problem. But it was very minimal, and it appears to have been a politicized investigation, not a normal, serious investigation by the FBI.
I certainly know that there was nobody from FBI cyber involved in it at the central headquarters. I know that the team, the FBI headquarters team of cybersecurity, I know most of the leadership there quite well, and they were certainly never involved. There was no hardware ever involved. So whatever investigation was launched was at best topical in that it spoke to people but never actually looked at the equipment.
Cliff, we know that Mike Connell was associated with the Bush campaigns in 2004 and 2000. And we know that his association with the Bush family in general goes back much further than that. What's his connection to the McCain campaign?
Stephen may know better, but our understanding is that Mr. Connell has been engaged to assist the IT function, web design function for the McCain campaign.
Yeah, he's running all of McCain's IT.
So he's running all of McCain's what?
IT.
IT. Okay.
And again, he also did the firewall in Congress, right, when Ney was in charge of administration, which has had problems recently with the so-called Chinese hacks.
And Mr. Connell also worked with the various manifestations of these front groups, for the U.S. Chamber front groups and tobacco industry front groups. And starting in 2000, after the New Hampshire primary, there was an unleashing of a variety of these Washington-based lobby groups that create these phony grassroots groups that attack candidates supposedly independently. We believe there's clear evidence of a coordinated campaign in which Mr. Rove is involved, in which Mr. Connell is an instrument. And again, this emphasizes his value as a witness in bringing some of this together without having to cast the net that broadly. He can sort of give us an overview of exactly what was going on.
Is anybody here aware of any member of Congress that is aware of the firewall that Mr. Connell has built? And if they are aware, are they taking any kind of evasive action not to?
Well, there's two people that are very well aware of it, and one which we can't mention now because there's a possibility of hearings next month. There is one congressperson who wants the information delivered on paper and not electronically. The question is raised is, I mean, Mr. Connell and the Rapp family both have this problem. On the one hand, you know, they're doing routine government work. On the other hand, they're involved in the most partisan campaigns in history. And it's the exact same people. I mean, for example, I was on the Rapp website, Triad, just last week, and they were selling a commemorative copy of the butterfly ballot that was poorly designed from Florida, and which they listed as a subsidiary company. So I would wonder why you would want those people anywhere around tabulators, why you wouldn't want that done by clearly nonpartisan IT companies.
Mr. Spoonamore, do you know if the Rapp family are still involved in Ohio and or other states?
involved in other states?
In Ohio and other states.
Yes, I believe they're involved in programming. At one time, they had contracts for as many as 12 states, parts of Pennsylvania, Alaska, Alabama, I believe Mississippi and Georgia. So they had a number of other smaller contracts for pieces of other states, but they have a pretty wide relationship of programming the calculators associated with the both debold and anti-bold systems.
Cliff, at one point this case was seeking to have court oversight of the 2006 election. What is the relief you're seeking now as you're trying to get the case reopened?
Basically, if the court says, well, what is it you want to do if we reopen this case, we want to conduct some limited discovery. We want to take the deposition of Mr. Connell. We want to take the deposition of the key people in the Rapp family, and we are making available Mr. Spoonamore, both informally and to the extent that anyone wants to take his deposition and rely on his expertise for purposes of a legal proceeding. We intend to use him as a witness in whatever relief we seek in terms of things that need to be done in the 2008 election to protect its integrity.
Is he being
So
compensated?
we would, after a brief period of discovery, very targeted discovery, we would then move to amend our complaint to focus on targets and corrective actions or protective actions that are necessary for to protect the 2008 election. I want to add that we are not critical. The main thing that we sought in the 2006 election was judicial supervision to assure honest oversight. We see the 2006 election of Jennifer Bruner as providing honest oversight, and we are not in any way criticizing her honesty or competence. And what we are simply doing is saying, if the litigation process, if we can help through the litigation process to address some of these integrity vulnerabilities, that's what we want to do.
And I mean, quite frankly, we provided a variety of suggestions to the Secretary of State, many of which he's carried out. The problem is some of them are broader, like having a security report. The problem is with the Everest study, for example, it showed that the more vulnerable than the machines are the electronic polling databases. So what we would like to see is specifics, like ongoing daily monitoring, so you don't have what happened in 2004, where the Diebold machines glitch 10,000 people off the roll, and there's no remedy just prior to the election. So I think also a background check. Who are the technicians that are, the techno-gods, I've seen them as election protection. They come in, they got a badge on them, they take the machines down, they mess with the memory cards, the hard drives. No one asks them who they are. No one does background checks on them. That's the type of detail I think we're working towards prior to the election.
And sometimes these technicians, these electronic technicians, come in and have free access to the ballots. So to the extent that they might have been...
Not sometimes. That would correct that. They always have completely free access. I mean, what's functionally happening with vote counting now at the county level is that everybody in a county has their votes. Now let's make an assumption. I'm going to go ahead and grant that every single grandmother has programmed every single touchscreen machine correctly, which we all know isn't true. And then we assume every single one of them worked perfectly. We assume the poll ballots work perfectly. Let's assume all that worked correctly. And what happens at the end of the day, all of those votes are thrown into a magic box with a little troll inside who's done the programming of how everything will be then reported. The troll jumps out and says, these are your results. Ta-da! That's it. There's no validation of the code. There's no authentication. Nobody has reviewed those processes in any way. And if you look at the Connolly analysis because somebody did something bad or somebody made a mistake that was not detected. And then you find it and you fix it. Instead, we have these discs installed. No one's inspected them. We've got no real idea what's there. And then all of a sudden, a very clear fraudulent pattern appears. And instead of having those discs locked down and looked at by a forensically qualified investigator, we call the very trolls who installed it that are either responsible for a mistake or malfeasance. We say, oh, trolls, come back. It's not working correctly. And they come back and do whatever it is they want to do. And I asked the people gathered there, if you've had a computer that's made any kind of process, have you ever, outside of electronic tabulations in Ohio voting, heard of your technician showing up and saying, well, in order for it to work properly, I have to swap out the hard disks? That's absurd. The only time that happens is when there is something on that hard disk that is fraudulent or erroneous that they know about and have to trade it out to fix it.
Yeah, isn't it true that when a company like Diebold or Premier Election System, whatever they're called now, when they sell their touchscreen equipments to a county, as it were, part of the free stuff that's part of that package, isn't there a sort of a software of election data that goes along with that? And it really, nobody knows how to operate that except the guys from the vendor themselves. So they come in and they...
Correct. And they refuse to allow anyone to review it.
Yeah. Now, if going back to Mr. Blackwell, he contracted with GovTech, which I believe Mr. Connell was associated with. From what you told us and what you haven't told us, but you may know, is there any reason to suspect that there ultimately is some sort of secret, super secret backdoor that both the Secretary of State's office had, GovTech had, and any vendor had, any county electronic voting database that is untraceable because we can't follow the breadcrumbs back to the source?
I will put my fraud investigator hat on, and I'm happy to follow up with stuff that I've worked on. So, I fairly often look at major global credit card fraud or money laundering fraud, and I'm asked to look at all the electronics and say, how did they do that, and where are the bad guys? Where do we go to look for them? Looking at Ohio 2004, this is what I see. I do not see that Mr. Connell was directly involved in the fraud. Mr. Connell was asked to build a tool to aggregate all of the incoming county results at this facility in Lexington. Now, why would they want them consolidated there? The reason they want them consolidated before they went to the Secretary of State's office is so that they would have a few seconds of knowledge in advance that they could then communicate to county-level tabulators to tune the election. And over the course of the evening, as these 14 counties with the Connolly anomaly began to crop up toward the end of the voting, it looks specifically as if they were tuned from somewhere else. Now, in order to tune them, meaning they are changing their results to report back what they want reported, you would have to know that you want to tune them to, and someone would have had to have installed in those 14 counties the code to listen for new reported information and to change results, tweak them, 1 or 2%, 3%, maybe 4 or 5% each. That's it. So the question of what code that is and how it was done needs to be done forensically by recovering the hard disks. That's it.
So let me ask you another question. The ultimate response... Go ahead.
Yeah, so from my perspective, if someone were to have called me in, and then I wrote this up literally days after the 2004 election, I said, this would immediately launch fraud. This is what appears to have happened. These elections were tuned. This is how it happened. But there wasn't anybody at that time who wanted to listen to that discussion.
Steve, would you you're willing to make it clear that you did write it up and report it to the FBI?
Oh yeah, sure. I called a number of friends. I actually was involved with. I reported a variety of stuff on the Georgia election in 2002, and in the case of the Georgia election in 2002, I even ended up finding a copy copy of the patch with the Euro signatures had installed at the last minute and turned that over to the FBI. I mean, this has been... None of us really want to confront the fact that it appears that there's an extremely coordinated effort by a very small group of people to tune elections, focused purely on control of the executive branch.
So
And I don't know, unfortunately, it always comes off a little wildly conspiratorially, but it's like, every time I see it, I'm like, oh my God, there it is again. And when you spend all day, every day, looking at this stuff and saying, well, that would certainly launch a fraud investigation at Citibank or MasterCard, but it doesn't when it comes to the Ohio vote. Why?
Well, let me ask you another question. I mean, this sounds like a plot to the next Ocean's 11 movie, only instead of stealing money from casinos in Vegas, we're stealing
You're going
votes.
to have to speak up a bit. I can't hear it.
All right, here's my question.
Harder to steal from the casinos because their code is actually transparent. Our machines aren't.
But here's the response that every Secretary of State will give you, every elected official will give you, both Republicans and Democrats will give you, and that the media has not followed up on. It's a bipartisan system, period.
No, it's not. It's not a bipartisan system. It's not even the bipartisan sides have no idea. This entire system is being programmed in secret by 4 or 5 programmers who have no oversight from anybody.
So the bipartisan nature of it, they're as out to lunch as anybody else. They have no idea what's...
In my opinion, both sides have no freaking clue what they're talking about. I've met all of about 3 politicians in my entire life who get it. And they simply just baffled. I mean, last year there's some great videotape. At the very last, at the final session, a bunch of the team from Princeton and Ed Jelton and his whole team came down, and we used a touchscreen voting machine, and we ran a mock election between Benedict Arnold and George Washington for the first presidency. We had 5 people in the room vote, and it was 5-0 Washington, but shockingly, when the tabulator ran the results, Benedict Arnold was the president by a 3-2 vote.
Spoon, just Spoon.
And you want to know why? Everyone was like, but I said, you can put every bipartisan oversight you want, and you can line up 500 grandmothers to do this, but the person who programs the code inside this machine will decide its results, period.
Spoon, when you use the term tuned, you are being euphemistic and suggesting that in Georgia 2002 and Ohio 2004, these modifications in the software were producing a change in the outcome of the election. Is that correct?
Correct. They were, and they do it in live time. See, the point is, when you're dealing with a network system, I mean, a lot of the times you get the vendors are there saying, but our voting machines are not connected to the internet. Well, in some states that's true, but all of the tabulators are. So these tabulators, these central computers you take the cards back to, they're talking to the Secretary of State's computer the whole time, and other computers potentially. And so when you start loading these vote results in, the results are coming in from a card, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what the computer is doing. You could be tuning it, and we use the term tuning, meaning in the computer world, if you're changing results live across a network to get to a particular end, we call it tuning. These are tuned results.
Do the Democrats have a counterpart to Mike Connell? Do they have an IT guy?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, it's interesting. Some other people have brought up. I mean, it's odd because I've known Mike because Mike is involved in a variety of democracy advocacy programs overseas. So he and I have actually. He's a very, very smart network engineer, and he's also a very, very
You've never encountered anyone.
He's had his hand in every major presidential campaign on the Republican side since '96 on an IT perspective. And then he's, as you guys have shared, he's built a lot of critical systems inside the executive branch and inside Congress. I don't know anyone else in a similar position, frankly.
What does the introduction of optical scanners, does that solve the problem?
What's that?
The introduction of optical scanners, going to paper ballots and having them scanned optically, does that solve?
And then you have a backup. Look, if you have optical scanners and nobody has placed bubbles over people's votes, yeah, you have a paper ballot to go back to. It doesn't however solve the problem of a tabulator. A tabulator, if it is misprogrammed, is going to come up with the result of Benedict Arnold 3 Washington 2, because that's what the programmer told it to come up with. And as a consequence, if a result like the Connolly anomaly appears, you go back to the ballots and say, this makes no sense, and you do a recount. Which I certainly know in 2004, when the Greens challenged, all kinds of craziness appeared in terms of differences between what the tabulators ended up saying versus what different pieces of the recount resulted in. And certainly, when you see that, well, somewhere in that chain, there's a problem. I am a huge believer that the best way to run an election and the cheapest way to run an election, because technology has to be replaced every 2 to 4 years because it basically becomes outmoded and easy to hack within one generation of Moore's Law, is the way Britain does it. You write out a ballot by hand, and then bank tellers, supervised by 3 or 4 people, count them by hand. And guess what? They come out correct with the total every time that there's a mistake. You recount them. In the case of the United States, we have gone down this rabbit hole where our sort of almost bizarre belief that technology improves things. That's just wrong. Technology is a neutral tool. Whether it's steel, then you can make a plow or a sword. Computers are evil creatures half the time and good creatures half the time, and they don't care. They are evil or good only based on who programs and uses them.
So optical scanners are good or not good?
They have a paper ballot. The paper ballot is good. If you choose then to use optical scanners, you better be ready when an anomaly comes up to go back and count the paper ballots by hand. If you have a paper ballot and want to automate it with optical scan, great. But personally, I think it's just a waste of time and money for everybody, because after 4 years, those optical scanners are so outdated, they're very easy to hack by future computers.
Cliff, your motion says the suspected lead perpetrator of this conspiracy is Karl Rove. What specifically are you alleging that Karl Rove did?
Well, Karl Rove was involved in the Bush campaign for president in the primary of 2000. Our understanding is that when they lost the New Hampshire primary, they were quite concerned, and they made a decision to take the gloves off. And part of taking the gloves off was for Mr. Rove to contact people with whom he had worked in industry, Grover Norquist and others, on behalf of the tobacco industry. At the time, the tobacco industry was fighting the Clinton administration $260 billion class action RICO case that was a companion to the state action that had recently been settled. That industry alone had a tremendous incentive to spend $1 billion or more than $5 billion, $10 billion to do whatever was necessary to kill that lawsuit. And George Bush, on Rove's recommendation, was positioned himself as the reformer with results. Not meaning the McCain reform of campaign finance reform, but the Bush reform in Texas, where they changed the composition of the Texas Supreme Court to be business friendly and to effectively immunize corporations from meaningful tort liability.
So they really didn't define results.
They turned these groups loose in South Carolina. They won South Carolina with a lot of independent expenditures and dirty tricks. And then that changed the momentum of the Republican primary. Bush became the Republican nominee. And Bush has been the architect ever since, including sitting in the White House and politicizing all aspects of the government and the political process to undermine the rule of law.
Grove.
Well, what did I say?
You said Bush was the architect.
Yeah, Rove was the architect of a strategy to, in effect, undo the rule of law, turn business loose, free of government regulation. That's been the policy. And it's payback for the promise they made, we're the reformer with results. It started in 2000.
But what did Rove do?
Politics, though, what did he do? What did he do that related to your specific claims here?
In the 04
regarding
election in Ohio.
manipulating the vote?
Well, we certainly want to take his deposition. His deposition has never been taken. Mr. Conyers is currently seeking his deposition in regard to what he did, which has been specifically alleged by a person who was told, received direct instructions from Rove in terms of going after Governor Siegelman in Alabama. And Mr. Rove is currently evading the congressional subpoena for his testimony.
Also, his email would have been on the same server, created, processed the websites down in Chattanooga that we outsourced the election results to from Ohio. And we do have testimony that suggests that he asked to have the emails destroyed on that server. And what we would like to do is to take a look at those emails. Remember, the president and Rove flew in unexpectedly on Election Day into Ohio, particularly after the reports were that the race was over and you had the unexpected swing at the last second. So we'd really like to look at the emails and wonder why he destroyed those and what he was in fact doing on Election Day in Ohio and just prior.
When you mentioned this, go ahead, Mark.
What did he perpetrate? He's the allegedly perpetrator.
Well, let me go back to right after the 2004 election. There was a new agent in charge placed in Cincinnati of the FBI, a guy named Stanley Borgia. His background was having been the lead investigator in the prosecution of the Buffalo Six. In that capacity, and this is reported, this is known and reported, he was in regular communication with the White House because of the political value and importance of that prosecution. He was moved, after that position, he was moved to head the counterterrorism operations of the FBI in Washington in either October or December of 2004. He's moved to be agent in charge of the Cincinnati office of the FBI. What I would suggest is that Karl Rove's responsible for that manipulation of the staffing of the FBI in Cincinnati that had jurisdiction over this investigation that was requested right in the aftermath of the election. And all Rove would have to do is say to Borgia that in this sensitive time, where we're about to engage in battle with terrorists in Fallujah, and we're about to have elections in Iraq to establish a new constitution, it's not a good time for the FBI to be dignifying the idea that there's been some corruption of this election, and George Bush stole the election. And he shut it down. We think that's what happened.
There's numerous reports from Woodward's book to mainstream magazines, essentially, how Rove led the press to shut down any events in Ohio, particularly recounts or any investigations. I mean, contacts at the White House, strangely, Mr. Carlo, according to Woodward's book, contacted the White House, Mary Madeline, and that's when Karl Rove went into the full court press. You should say, well, that's just politics. You didn't want it to go on. On the other hand, it's, you're flying into the state. Mr. Rove is reported to be the only person that believes that the president should still win. You have a statistically improbable switch with late recording counties in the Southwest, where essentially Kerry is running behind an underfunded, retired African-American municipal judge from Cleveland, and also running behind Democratic sacrificial lamb candidates that should have stimulated immediate, a recount and investigation.
That
and
would have been
the
after the
minutes.
fact. What did he do before the fact?
But
No, I want to add.
he was the architect of the entire process. I mean, he's the person who's hiring.
The architect of not only the vote
And
tampering, but of the voter suppression, targeted at African American and young college voters. And there is evidence of this in a documentary film called American Blackwell. At the annual meeting of the National Urban League, Bush appears, and he asks for the vote of African Americans. And there's sort of a laugh, and he said, well, I realize there's a problem here. But he says, I'm serious, I want your vote, I want your support. So then he goes down a long receiving line of all the leaders of the African American community in this country. He gets to Reverend Jesse Jackson. Reverend Jackson says, Mr. President, give me a hug. No, wait, give me a hug. It'll make the news. It'll make the national news. Bush hugs him. He said, I'd like to talk with you about letting my people vote. Bush says, call Karl Rove. He moves to the next person. Jackson pursues him. No, Mr. President, I really need to talk to you. 1 million of our people couldn't vote in the last election, talking about 2000. Bush says, Jesse, you've got to talk to Karl Rove. He's a big fan of yours. Implicitly, what he's saying is we're suppressing African American voters because Rove says it's necessary. And you persuade him it's not necessary, he can let up on it. Rove is at the center, as Bush said, he is the architect of the 2000 and 2004 election, the manipulation in 2002, in manipulations in 2006, and he's consulting with the McCain campaign for purposes of manipulating the 2008 election.
And again, remember the crux of this suit, if you're not purging voters in Republican rural counties like Miami County, which is 98% white in 2004, and you purge 24.93% of every single voter in Cleveland, that raises all sorts of questions of disparate treatment. And the question is, how do we make sure that doesn't happen again? And if we just see it as standard political tactics. But all sources say that Rove is the architect of that strategy.
Indicated that this is a pattern across the United States. Is that what you're pursuing here with this RICO action?
Yes, we're asserting that we see a pattern of corrupt activity that rises to the level prohibited in the Ohio statutes, and we see Mr. Rove as being at the center of this.
Secretary Bruner has raised objections in other litigation to pursuing additional discovery between now and the election, saying she's got enough to worry about just trying to run the 2008 election this fall. If she opposes your motion to lift the stay and the stay is not lifted, do you have any other options, or is this your only vehicle?
Well, from the beginning of our involvement in this process, we have looked at the investigative press corps as an ally. The investigative press corps of this state are the ones who developed the political conspiracy that was involving the various leaders in the Republican Party in Ohio with various corporations illegally trying to assassinate Justice Resnick. That was your story.
Political assassination.
Political assassination. And we have therefore consistently tried to keep the press informed. We advised the court when we told them we were going to seek lifting of the stay. We advised them that we were going to be briefing the press. You know, part of this is if the press sees this as a problem that the public needs to know about, that is another avenue besides litigation. Furthermore, as I said, we have respect for the Secretary of State. I talked with Mr. Coghlanese this morning, and we agreed that Mr. Spoonamore will be briefing Rich about the specifics that we see, the target that we want to go after, and if his preference is that he do it, that he conduct informal investigation, or that the Secretary does it. You know, we're here to cooperate. We're not trying to disrupt. We're not trying to cause problems. We're trying to assist.
And also there's a possibility that Mr. Spoonamore may be speaking before Congress and offering his expertise as well. I think once the information is out, it's not going to disrupt anything. It's just going to allow the Secretary of State in Ohio and elsewhere to fine-tune the security procedures.
Mr. Conyers was tremendous assistance to the to us in the aftermath of the 2004 election, and he's recently said he's very excited about the opportunity to meet with Mr. Spoonamore and I expect there will be a hearing before the.
Is he being paid, Spoonamore?
At this point, he's assisting us pro bono publico.
But you hesitated.
Well, if we can raise a budget to compensate him, we would like to compensate him.
No, I've been, since 1999 when somebody first came to me with some plans about voting machines, and I told them that they should just give up, because there really is no way to build a securable system of electronic voting. I mean, there is, as I said, the very best systems we design on the planet to settle your credit cards, we understand that we're going to have 16 basis points of error and fraud on a good day. We know that. And, that's not a lot, but that's for something that's run every day by thousands and thousands of professionals looking out for it. Since 99, I've been telling people this is crazy. And repeatedly, whenever anybody has asked, I've offered whatever insights I can offer as to why it's crazy and why it should just be stopped.
When you say 16 basis points.
The entire Help America Steal Votes Act, or whatever the official name of it ended up being, which fundamentally, this is the thing that is still murky, is Bob Nay's office, convicted felon Nay's office, and convicted felon Abramovsov was his team, along with the Savage brothers, are functionally the ones who wrote that act. Well, when all of a sudden you've got a bunch of fraudsters in a room writing an act, why? Why were they behind all this? And from my perspective, looking at the computer architecture of all the voting machines sold in this country, they're not securable. So the question becomes, when will people begin to listen to that? I mean, we're very trusting people. It's like in America, we look at this and go, no, it's still votes here, we're a democracy. But the truth is, if you look at the Orange Revolution and what happened in Ukraine, the reason that a forced recount occurred was because of an anomaly in the difference in some exit polling and returns that ended up being 1 or 2% different than the reported results. But sure enough, ended up being the difference in the election and the difference in the fraud. Election fraud only needs to move things 3 or 4%, and with a computer that's an unbelievably simple thing to program and a very, very simple thing to hide. So, no, this is, as a citizen, I continue to offer anybody who wants to get serious and address these questions, I will attempt to help people address them.
Stephen,
I found most people just seem to want to deny it's possible, go back to sleep.
before Julie leaves, are you a Republican?
Yes, I've been a lifelong member of the Republican Party, sadly. I worked very hard for Mr. McCain's campaign in 1999 in New York City, where I lived at the time, and I remain a registered Republican to this day.
When you say 16 basis points, is that 16 hundredths of a percent?
Yeah, 1600. I mean, that's on a good day. We have that. If we have that, then we're all like, woohoo, we're below the threshold of having to launch a problem investigation.
So it's less than 1%.
Like that's the background noise of minor fraud and minor credit card theft and machines making mistakes. That's background noise on an incredibly well-managed system is 16 basis points. And on a bad day, I mean, we get involved very often in problems where people have deliberately launched fraud, where we'll see things in the 54, 63 basis points, 68 basis points, and we instantaneously begin launching countermeasures and investigations and shutting down machines.
And that's still less than...
If you weren't doing that on a real basis, moving things 3%, or what would then be 300 basis points, that's simple. It's simple to do it. The question is, do you have oversight and controls to stop it? And the answer with our voting machine systems is no. There is no
let's talk about money there. We're just talking about democracy here.
Stephen, thank you very much, and we'll be back with other communications here shortly.
Thank you, Stephen.